You're watching the Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates. You're listening to A Pirate's Life for Me on the Sports Objective. Join us every Friday at noon as we catch up with a member of Pirate Nation. Here's your host, Bubba Rosenbaum.
What is going on, Pirate Nation? Welcome into another edition of A Pirate's Life for Me here on the Sports Objective. We hope everyone's 2023 is off to an excellent start. After a bit of a hiatus with A Pirate's Life for Me toward the end of 2022, glad to be back at it. And today, very excited to be joined by a guy who not only knows East Carolina football very well, but has served in a variety of capacities at East Carolina University and with East Carolina Athletics. Welcome into the show, Pirate fan and the author of My View from 20 Rows Up, One Pirate Fan's Story of ECU Football, Carl Davis. Carl, we appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, Bubba, for having me on. I appreciate it.
No doubt. Really looking forward to getting into your Pirate background and just finding out what compelled you to write the book, My View from 20 Rows Up, because I know you've seen a ton of East Carolina football over the years. But before we dive into the book itself, tell Pirate fans who aren't familiar with you, your background with East Carolina University and your love of Pirate football, where that originated.
Well, I came to school here first time in 1969 and graduated. I managed campus radio station. I was real involved in student media. I had a good time with that, and went to a lot of ball games even in those days. I went to the Marshall game, the infamous Marshall game. But over the years, we moved to Raleigh. I moved to Raleigh after graduation, a few years after, and stayed there for 40 years. And then we moved back a few years ago. But during those years, I've served on a number of boards and committees and so forth, and I've been chairman of the Board of Visitors, chairman of the Alumni Association. I've served on a number of search committees, Hall of Fame committee, different things like that. Any way I could serve and any way I could help the university out is what I've tried to do.
You talk about being in class of '69, obviously, and during the '60s and the Pirates.
I was high school class of '69. I started in '69. I was class of '73. Yeah. Coming up on my 50th reunion here.
But during those years, and the Pirates were coming off a very successful decade under Clarence Stasevich and the majority of that decade, and then toward the end, you had a little drop off, and then Coach Stass, though he was in administrative role as well, and then you had Mike McGee come in for a season, and then things really got rolling under Sonny Randall and Pat Dye. So what are some of your favorite memories from those years as a student, and I guess also as a young grad?
Well, I go back even further with Stass. I mean, that's sort of my part of my motivation. I talk a lot about this in the book, by the way. Stass, the first 5 years of my life in Hickory, North Carolina, I lived down the street from Stass. And we lived right a block or so from the Lenorine, and went to church right across the street from the college. And Hickory was all wrapped up in Lenorine, and Hickory was all wrapped up in Coach Stass. I mean, he was everything there. And it was, I think there's probably still people, 60 plus years later who are still upset that East Carolina hired Stass away from Lenorine. I mean, you look at the Lenorine media guide, and it will call the period when Stass was there the glory days. And they've only been to like one bowl other than the FCS or whatever playoffs, Division II playoffs. They've only been to one bowl since Stass left there. And so Stass was a big deal. And so when I came here, obviously he was here, and then he became the AD. And I think some of the memories that carry forward with Stas. The day he died, the next day we beat Carolina for the very first time. And I think that's sort of the win-one for the Gipper story, if they're ever, if East Carolina has one of those. But also I remember McGee, and I certainly remember Sonny Randall. Everybody remembers Sonny Randall. They gave Sonny a car at the end of his last season. And, of course, things were much different back then. They gave him the car, and I think they drove it out on the field or something. And it was just at the end of or beginning of the last game. It was a big deal, and everybody got a good laugh when he went to Virginia and drove his new car up there. So he didn't leave in such good graces. And then, as you probably know, he said at the time that Virginia and East Carolina, comparing the two was like comparing apples to oranges. So we went up there a few years later and we beat them, I don't know, 61-7 or 63-3. I mean, it was a real total beatdown. So when he walked off the field, they threw apples and oranges at him. So, it was kind of a fitting thing. So that's my thing on Sonny. And then Pat Dye, he kind of brought real football to Greenville. I mean, he was obviously an SEC guy, and the SEC even back then was the big deal. And I think he did a great job here. I mean, I think he's one of the great coaches here. So that's sort of that's sort of the early history part.
Yeah, I was born in 1981, but my dad's a 76 grad, and he was at that game against Virginia when the Pirates won handily, as you said, and he was telling me the stories about throwing the fruit at Coach Randall as he was leaving the field, and heard an interesting story from Coach Dye himself when we had him on the show back in December 2018. And he shared a story during pregame when Coach Randall said, something that, I'll take it easy on you today, Pat. And he said, do whatever you need to do, Sonny. But and needless to say, it was us needing to take it easy on the Wahoos. But, going back to not to get off on an extreme tangent here, but you're bringing up Lenore Ryan. Lenore Ryan, there's some very interesting ties, not only with Clarence Stasovich. You had also Dr. Henry Van Sant.
Right.
He spent time there as an assistant football coach, and you obviously Mike Houston in present day. He took LR. You talk about their minimal success. He guided them to a D2 national championship game appearance. But
yeah,
there are some interesting ties between the two schools.
Yeah, the Houston trip to the D2 championship is the only glory moment that they've had in 60 years. I mean, really, truly, the only great thing to happen there. They've been mired in mediocrity, ever since Stasovich left, and I don't really know the reason why. I haven't been able to try to figure that out. My first trip to Greenville, and again, I talk about this in the book, my very, very first trip to Greenville was as a Lenore Ryan fan. I was 8 years old, and my grandfather and I used to go to all the LR home games and the occasional road game. And whatever we were having, LR was having a great year. And so this was 1959, and we made the trip to Greenville. And let me tell you, from Hickory to Greenville in those days was a long trip, okay? And we came here, we played, it was one of the very last games of the year. And there's various stories about this game, but it was in the old college stadium, which is over on 10th Street, or right over on, where the Brewster building is now. Anyway, we came down here, and the game was kind of back and forth, and Lenore Ryan scored with, I don't remember, 20 seconds, something like that to go. And of course, when that happened, Clarence Stasevich, a little bit of Steve Logan there, he went for two. They were down by a point, so they could have tied. And, of course, back in those days, no overtime. So the game would likely have ended in a tie. So he didn't want to tie. He wanted to win, so he went for two. And there's all kinds of controversy about what actually happened on that play. I've talked to a lot of people that were there, and I've read all the newspaper accounts, and nobody really knows what happened in that game. But the prevailing opinion is that Lenoir-Rhyne threw a pass that may or may not have hit the ground, and he may or may not have been beyond the line of scrimmage, and on and on and on and on. One newspaper in the East said we were robbed. Another one said something like controversial, something, and then the Hickory newspaper said Lenoir-Rhyne wins a close game. Lenoir-Rhyne was ranked second in the country and in the NAIA at the time, and went on to the championship game that year, and then went on the following year to win the championship. But my first exposure to Greenville and to East Carolina football was coming here to watch Lenoir-Rhyne play.
And before we move on and continue talking football, you also have obviously John Gilbert. I failed to mention him. The tie there, and then also our excellent new soccer coach, Gary Higgins, came from Lenoir-Rhyne. So a lot of interesting ties between East Carolina and now what is LRU.
Yeah. The one thing you have to note is that when Stasevich got here, there was an immediate pipeline of players. Stasevich was such a dominant figure in Hickory that he got players from the 5 or 6 or 8 counties around Catawba County. And when he came down here, there was a pipeline directly from Western North Carolina to East Carolina. And, that there's always been a lot of that. And that may be why a lot of the Hickory people are still upset about Stas leaving. He left and he took all the players with him,
Yeah, and the transfer portal before the transfer portal. But,
exactly.
But my dad said that he said a lot of people, he said East Carolina hiring Clarence Stasevich away from Lenoir-Rhyne College that was a huge, huge deal.
That was a Leo Jenkins deal, as everybody knows. The story goes, and I'm not sure, I've heard a lot of people tell the story, but supposedly when Frank McGuire was coaching basketball, and I think he was at South Carolina maybe at that point, but I don't know. I can't remember. I've heard the story, but supposedly Leo went to him and tried to hire him and offered him something outrageous, but it didn't work. So Frank told him that, with Duke, of course, Duke was a big deal back then, Duke and State and Carolina and so forth. Don't try to build a basketball program in Greenville. What you need to do is, they're not that great in football, so why don't you go build a football program that's as good or better than the others? And I think that's what motivated Leo to go look for somebody like Stasevich. That's the story that's always been told.
Before we dive into some of the specifics of the book, just tell our listeners and viewers, what compelled you to even write the book? Because obviously it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, well, it's sort of been a labor of love. I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. It's been off and on for a while. I put it down. I started it and I put it down for 2.5 years and never touched it. And then started again when I retired about a year ago. My wife and I traveled over a period of 24 years. We only missed 4 games home and away in that 24 years. So I I had a lot of things. Obviously, when you go to that many football games, you have a lot of things happen, and you see a lot of things, and you kind of get a different perspective on it. And when I would tell people the story about, I've been to all these games, they'd say, well, what was the best game? What was the best stadium? Who were the best fans? Who were the worst fans? Who were this or who were that? I would tell them, and I'd tell them why I felt that way. Then they would say, well, you ought to write a book about it. So I did,
So you talk about having started several years ago and then putting it down for 2.5 years. Even with that 2.5 year lapse there where you didn't touch it, how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, I was when I first started it. I'd say for maybe 18 months or 2 years, I wrote a little bit along. I might write 2 or 3, 4 pages, write a chapter, and then not touch it for 2 weeks. It just was probably over a period of, and I was working full time and going to ball games and doing, living my life. This was just something I was doing on the side. So I'd say maybe a couple of years, and then I put it down. And then about 6 months before I retired, in the summer of 21, I decided to retire at the end of the year, and I thought, I ought to finish that darn book. So I opened the file up, and I looked, and I hadn't touched it in 2.5 years. So it really mostly was written from, say, about February of 22 until September or October of this year. Although I added, a few games all the way through the end of the season, obviously not the bowl game. But so it's taken, I guess took about 7 months or 8 months really of more intense stuff. Everything I wrote, probably the first third or a little less than a third of the book, I didn't touch it. So I just picked up where I left off and kind of got to the end of the book. And then I went back and read and rewrote the first third. So if you write a book, especially something that's nonfiction and like this, you do a whole lot of going back and rewriting and editing and changing stuff up. It's not a very clean process. You don't write something and then never look at it again. Just say, okay, that's chapter 1. You don't do that. So, or maybe some people do. I can't do that. So I go back and I read it. In fact, since it was finally published and printed starting December 16th. And when I got my first copy, I started reading it and I went, gosh, I wish I'd said something different there. So it's one of those things that's never really finished, if that makes any sense.
Definitely makes sense. Although I've certainly never authored a book, thinking about things that I have written, just articles, a lot of times it can be a good thing and a bad thing to be your own worst critic, because you don't want to, you strive for perfection, but a lot of times, that you always think, well, I could have said this here instead of this and that kind of deal. But as far as the way the book's laid out, I have not had a chance to get my hands on a copy yet, but will definitely be doing so. You've had a chance to see over a half century of East Carolina football. So where does the book start? Obviously, the East Carolina program began way back in 32, but yeah. Where do you pick things up?
Well, it sort of picks up. I guess I would say it picks up when I tell the story about that first game that I just talked about in November 1959. But most of the more intense stories have been in the last 25 years. Those have been the ones from the mid 90s really on to today. But the book's organized. I don't know if it makes any sense, but the way I organized it was, I think people judge you, and they judge college football teams a lot, not so much by what they do, but a lot of times by who they play. I mean, if you beat if you beat Lenoir-Rhyne, who's going to care, right? But if you beat Notre Dame, people are going to care a whole lot. So I organized the book primarily by our opponents, starting with the first significant opponent and carrying it through. No, we're starting with the first time we played this particular school. So it starts with me talking about what motivated me and the sort of the beginning. And then it starts with Appalachian, because that's the first team we played of any significance. I don't have chapters on Lenoir-Rhyne and Catawba and Wofford and Newberry and all that. I start with App State and then Southern Miss and so forth and so forth and so forth, carrying it through all the way through. It ends with BYU. That's the school that we played the last. In other words, the first time we played BYU was just 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I start by it's in chronological order of the schools we played. It's always a chapter about our relationship and our games with whatever school, whether it's Carolina, whether it's Wake Forest or whoever it is. And it starts and it works its way through and ends with BYU. And then there's a chapter on bowl games and conference championships. And then there's there's a section on what I call superlatives. And that's going to be, in my opinion, the best administrator, the best coach, best assistant coach, the best pirate, the best student pirate, the best scholarship that our university has ever given for athletics, and who had it and how it played out. And the best player, all the way through there. And then the last little small section is a section about, I won't call it leadership. I'm going to say it's about people who've made a difference in our program, especially our football program. People who just some people, are obvious that you would think about, like Walter Williams is someone that people would think about. I mean, Walter made a huge difference in our university. But then there's some others that you don't think so much about. And I've, did a little, couple pages on each of them. So it's football and it's superlatives, and then it's kind of people that made a difference.
As far as taking a look, you mentioned the way you organize things by opponents, with obviously way too many teams to go through.
I think there's 39, 38 or 39.
What are some of your your major highlights and top memories? Be it from the NC State series or Virginia Tech, South Carolina, what have you?
Well, I could talk about all three of those, but NC State is one of those places that they want to be way better than they'll ever be. But anyway, the thing with NC State is they always say when East Carolina plays NC State, it's our Super Bowl, and we're not rivals, and we're not this, and we're not that. Well, I don't remember exactly the year. It's in the book, but we lost to them at Carter Finley Stadium, and they tore down the goalpost. Okay, so if we ain't a rival, then why are you tearing down the goalpost, right? Why do we always sell out Carter Finley Stadium? It ain't all East Carolina fans, okay? So I talk a little bit about. I mean, we talk about the games, of course, and the Russell Wilson interception and some of that stuff, but we talk about a lot of the reasons that, hey, this really is a rivalry, okay? And I don't care how they phrase it, how they say it, whatever. The largest at the time in 96, I think it was 96, the largest crowd to ever see a college football game in North Carolina up until 1996 was when East Carolina played NC State. So, so we are rivals, whether they want to admit it or not. And that's the point I want to try to make in the book. As far as Virginia Tech is concerned, I talk a little bit about one of the more emotional games that I've ever been to, and that was the one after the shooting at Virginia Tech. And Terry Holland helped organize what we call the Hokie Hope Fund, and we raised $100,000 for that fund as a gift from East Carolina to Virginia Tech. We presented a check to them that day on the field before the game, and it was just, I mean, it was, game day was there. It was just a totally emotional moment for, obviously for Virginia Tech people, but for anybody that was at that game. And so I thought we had, and I think we did. I think Frank Beamer really liked playing in East Carolina, or wanted to play East Carolina. And I thought we had a really, really special relationship with Virginia Tech. And then we had the incident, and I talk about this in the book about the cancellation of the game during the Hurricane Florence situation. And every other darn game in the Carolinas and Virginia was either canceled or moved. And so why they got upset about us canceling is hard, because we were closest to the hurricane of anybody. So, I sort of contrast the moment after the shooting, when everybody was loving everybody and thank you Pirates and all this stuff, to what happened a few years later when they slammed the door in our face.
Yeah, excellent points. And going back to your thoughts and perspective on the NC State series, taking a look at that, as you said, we had won in '87, we had won the Peach Bowl, and then we had won in '96 in Charlotte in the game that you referenced at Erickson Stadium, as it was then. I was certainly there that night as Scott Harley ran for 351 yards. Game I'll never forget. But
Me too.
In 1997, that was the one you referenced when the State fans rushed the field. And that year, it wasn't like 2008 where we were ranked 15th. That year, we were 5-5 playing for a winning season when they rushed the field. So, as you said, despite what they want to say as far as it not being a rivalry, certainly is, and their actions proved otherwise, or validated just that it.
Oh, sure.
It was a game they really wanted to win, because we were a 5-5 team, and we'd only played 3 times, but they hadn't beat us since I guess 1986 or 85, something like that.
Yeah, that could be a subject for a book right there. But I also talked about the imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I put the picture in there of when they ripped off our logo. If you remember that we had the Pirate State of Mind logo in our field, and then a few years later they copied it. And,
yes.
I have that picture. I have that picture in the book just in case, just for reference.
Yeah, we unveiled that logo in 2009, that Virginia Tech game, and as you said, a few years later they had the North Carolina outline with Mr. Wolf in the middle. But
and then we came to town, by the way, and they tried to do away with it, and the outline was still on the field.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was, I guess that was that 2013 game where where Shane Carden and the guys lit them up. It was 42-28, but not nearly that close. They scored twice in the final minute.
Yeah, it was 42-14. When everybody hit, when all their fans hit the. I have a picture of the stadium in there from that one too. They tried to, again, not a rivalry, but they tried to tone down the Pirates the best they could. So they put us in the 4 corners of the stadium, if you remember that. And so as soon as the crowd thinned out a little bit, we got that purple and gold cheer going across the stadium. It worked out real well.
Yeah, and definitely backfired on them. But another couple tremendous games, one of which was in the fabled Orange Bowl, and then another that was supposed to be played at Dowdy Ficklin, but as we know, got moved to Carter Finley Stadium.
Oh, yeah.
those two games against the Miami Hurricanes, two of the best wins in our program's history when they were ranked 12th and 9th, respectively.
Yeah, I talk a lot about that the Hurricane Floyd game, and I think that was probably to me the most significant game in our history. I mean, and because it was way more than a football game. I mean, it had all the other stuff wrapped around it. But if you listen to people nowadays, and this happened back during the summer. I was with a friend and his wife, and their sister-in-law came along for lunch. We had lunch in Raleigh, and she was a state person, and I heard the story about how state was so nice to let East Carolina use their stadium to play Miami. And we totally trashed the stadium and did hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage and all kinds of crap like that, And I mean, we tore down the goalpost. We paid for the goalpost. I mean, I can't see that we trashed the stadium. I was there. I didn't see that, but the mythology of all of this has carried on. The same as the so-called riot, that stopped the series and all of that. That these stories kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger. And those of us who were there, we know the story. And I hope maybe this book will dispel some of that.
Yeah, that night at Carter Finley Stadium, even when we trailed 23-3 there early in the second half, I had an odd feeling, like, because we had done some good things and just shot ourselves in the foot. And we shot a few toes off in that first half. But I was like, if we can get ourselves together here, then we can come back and win this game. And I had a, kind of an odd sense of confidence considering we were down by 3 touchdowns to the number 9 team in the country.
Yeah, I don't know that I was overly confident. It was a seriously interesting game, and the crowd that night, the band, it was a full moon. I mean, it was certainly special, and certainly one I'll remember the rest of my life.
You talk about with the organization of the book, a favorite player, a few. Who are some of your favorite all-time Pirates? And if you want to go by decade or however you want to discuss it.
Well, I didn't do best. I didn't do by decade at all. And as I say, I talk about who I think is the best player ever. Let's just say that, okay? And it's really hard to contrast a player, and it's hard to contrast, say a great defensive player with a great offensive player, great running back with a great quarterback, or a great wide receiver. And how do you talk about centers, and how do you talk about defensive linemen? We may have had the greatest defensive lineman in history. I mean, so it's really hard to contrast players, offense and defense, and by position. And then you throw in the fact that football was way different in 1965 than it is today. So, you just have to kind of, grab the seat of your pants and hold on, just say, well, here we go. This is what I think was the best. And the one that kind of stands the test of time. And I think that's the way I judged it. And that's the way I judge coaches. That's the way I judge administrators and players and just a lot of others.
I know through the years, and you had the opportunity, from being such a loyal supporter, as a fan, and also, serving on various committees and so forth. Just you had the chance to develop relationships, with coaches and administrators, be it a Steve Logan, a Terry Holland, whoever. What are some of those top stories or memories that you can share about some of your interactions with those individuals?
Well, I'll do the two you mentioned, Logan and Holland. I got to know Steve a little bit. I was friends of a friend of his, and we chatted a lot. And then Steve was looking to buy a condo at the beach, and he came and looked at ours. This was probably 1999. And, eventually bought one, and very close to ours. And so I ran into him. We've since sold it here the last couple of years, but, I've run into Steve quite often and shoot the bull with him some, and about life, and not just always about football and stuff. And he's an interesting sort of eclectic sort of guy. The stories about he likes wine, and he likes to play the guitar, and which is I think a lot of football coaches maybe are a little bit more one-dimensional than that. Certainly not Mike Leach, for example, but throwing Steve into that category more like Mike Leach than being so focused, just laser focused on football. I think he's a brilliant offensive coach, brilliant offensive mind, and a pretty good guy at player development, certainly at quarterback development. And I don't have any real specific stories. I think that he was very he started out not this way, but he developed a sense of where he was very leery of the media and very leery of talking to people who were in the media, because of the fact that he felt he'd been burned a few times, and he had been. It hadn't been a great relationship on some of those occasions, and so that's sort of where I am with Logan. Terry Holland is a guy who is a great leader, and Terry Holland would have been a great leader no matter what he went into. In other words, whether it was basketball coaching or whether it was administration or whatever, if he'd have gone into to work for Apple or wherever, he'd have been a great leader there too. He's just the kind of guy that I've always said that great leaders are how they are people that make you feel good. It's people don't remember what you say, but they always remember how you make them feel. And Terry Holland always made you feel good. I mean, no matter what. And Terry Holland was a smart guy in that he didn't operate in a vacuum. Terry Holland would hire people, and he'd hire good people, and he would let them do their jobs. And he'd say, if you need some help, let me know. Otherwise, do your job. And Terry Holland would also ask for advice. He'd ask for opinions. I'm not the only one he did this with, but, I'd get a call occasionally saying, do you know so-and-so, and what do you think of him? And I had that several times, and I know other people have. And there's also these, there's some of these emails that whatever subject, something would blow up and be a problem or whatever, and Terry would write a missive. It would be a long story, about what had happened and so forth and so forth. And it was more to get it off his chest than it was asking for advice and so forth. And I've got a couple of those 3-pagers in my file that I've saved over the years. So that's the kind of guy Terry Holland is. My favorite Terry Holland story is one from the night I first met him, and that was the night he was inducted into the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame. Terry was inducted there as this was several years before East Carolina, and he was still at Virginia. And he tells a story about, and he's told it many times since then, that when he was recruited by Lefty Driesell, Lefty came to his house, and Lefty also, besides coaching basketball at Davidson, Lefty was also selling encyclopedias. And so they came in and had a nice chat, and he was getting ready to go take his girlfriend, soon to be wife, Ann, to the prom. And he says, "Curry, take my car." And he tossed him his keys. And he said, when I got down the road a little while later, I thought, oh my God, I've left my mom alone with Lefty Driesell. And then when he got back, he says, not only was I going to Davidson, but we also had a new set of encyclopedias. So, so Terry was that kind of guy, and entertaining and engaging, and always made you feel good, always made you feel positive. And so I have really, really, really fond memories of Terry Holland.
No doubt, as do I, and that's something I wholeheartedly agree with you on, because during Terry Holland's years, at least the first part of those years at East Carolina back in 2004, 5, 6, 7, I was a young teacher and not able to give much to the Pirate Club, but despite the fact that I was, $100, $200 donor, he still made it a point to speak to me. You would have never known that I wasn't a larger donor, and that's one of the things I really respected and admired about Terry Holland, as you said, and the way he, viewed everyone as important to East Carolina athletics cause.
Yeah, and there's no doubt he was a class act, and there have been a lot of others kind of over the years who've been important in our program and made some serious contributions. And there've been some interesting players, and and then been great people. I mean, great leaders and great players. Our program has been very, very blessed to have some of these people, pass our way. And we have to just hope that we can continue to find good people and continue to find people that want to come here. And one thing I have learned about recruiting students, and this a little bit of this falls into the same category as recruiting players, and that is, if you're able to get them to campus, if you're able to get them to Greenville, and they meet the people here, they see the facilities, they see the campus here, you have a really high chance of success of getting them. That you would be surprised at the number of people who they come here and they go, wow, I had no idea this was like this. This was so nice, and this was so good. And I don't think we get enough credit around the country with having this kind of program, and having, whether it's medicine or dentistry or business or football. I think we get shortchanged a little bit when you get east of I-95, west of I-95.
And that's a good segue. You talk about, and just general student population, and a lot of the programs that East Carolina University has to offer, and the strides it's made over the last few decades. But just, I know this book, everything that you make from this book is going toward an ECU scholarship, correct?
Right. We've been donors to ECU for years and years and years, and supported the Pirate Club, supported academics in different departments and different things. But this one is special. I wanted to do an access scholarship. And for people that don't know what an access scholarship is, it's a scholarship for people, for a person who cannot afford to come to East Carolina. In other words, they have the grades and they have the desire to come here, and they don't have the means to come here. And this is to provide access for them. So back in October, my wife and I established the scholarship. We seeded it. And so all of the proceeds, 100% of the proceeds from this book, will go to the Carl and Martha Davis Access Scholarship at ECU. And I like to tell people, I told somebody this morning this story. I'm paying, I paid the editor, and I paid the design person, and I paid Amazon, and I paid, publishers and all this. I paid to print the book. Okay. So I have all that in the book. So the royalties and all that cost. In other words, we sell the book for $19.99. I'm going to give $19.99, even if I only get $5 worth of royalties. I'm going to give full $19.99 to the scholarship. So if we sell 100 books, we've actually sold 230 now. But if for every book we sell, I give $20 to the scholarship. So the business model I have established is the more I sell, the more I lose. Now, the way I look at it is I wasn't a business major here, so that's my business model. So, you take it any way you want it, but the more I sell, the more I lose. So if you want to cost me some money, buy the book.
Well said. And that book is, of course, my view from 20 rows up, one Pirate fan story of ECU football. And there's the cover, as you see on the screen, for our viewers on YouTube and Facebook. And Carl, tell folks, is there on the screen for them, but for our listeners, tell folks how they can get the book.
Yeah, on Amazon, you need to type in the title, My View from 20 Rows Up, or if you type in ECU football book, those 3 words, ECU football book, it'll find it. And if you don't want to order it from Amazon, and probably if you buy it locally, I actually do better on it because I only get the royalties on the other side. So you can go to Stadium Sports. They have it. They had it like Saturday. UBE has it as of today. So you guys can walk in there and say, I want a book.
And one other thing I wanted to mention, we really appreciate you being so generous with your time today. I know you also, as you said, you saw the majority of the Pirates road games for 24 years, with maybe an exception of a game or two. So, what are some of those top venues you've been to, be it a Neyland Stadium or the Swamp or Williams-Brice Stadium, et cetera?
That's an interesting question. They're all so different. I gotta say that that Mikey Stadium in West Point is because of weights, the way everything that's there is presented, and they march in groups, and they all stand for the whole darn game and all of that. That, if you've never been to a game at a military academy, and especially Army, that's special. That is very, very special. But then again, I was not so taken with the Swamp. And I went to Alabama, and we played them at Legion Field. And God knows I've been to Legion Field so many times. I mean, 2 bowl games, Alabama, and however many times we played UAB there. I can tell you that the UAB people are very, very happy that they're not playing in that place anymore. But
no doubt.
I mean, there's some interesting, some very interesting places over the years. I'm really trying to think of one that stands out. UTEP stands out a lot because the setting of the stadium is such. It's a lot like BYU. BYU's got the mountains there, but UTEP looks like the stadium is carved out of the mountain, and you're sitting down in the mountain. It's right there on campus, and it's really a pretty cool place. BYU is obviously very special. If you want to know about a place that you wouldn't think is special, you got to think about Southern Miss. Those people are the best. I mean, just the best people. I mean, you just can't imagine when you go there and you're wearing your purple shirt and you walk through the crowd, Come on over here and have some chicken. Hey, how about a drink? You want a drink? Here, here you go. Come on over. Let's talk some football. You guys are playing well. They know more about East Carolina football than we do. Okay, I mean they are the most knowledgeable, the most hospitable people, some of the best fans you will ever meet anywhere. So Southern Miss is definitely a great place to go. They don't have all the advantages that we have, but it's a special place. There's always quite a few others. I mean, I talk in the book a lot about and why I do it by school is like we talk about Cincinnati and kind of where they came from, and Houston, like where they came from. My first trip to Houston was the first time East Carolina played there, and I don't remember which year it was. In the late 90s, and so we show up, and I knew the stadium was on campus, right? So I figured I can find a football stadium on a college campus, right? Follow the crowd, look for the signs, whatever. Well, I was wrong. So I'm wandering around in my rental car looking for this football stadium. And finally, I don't see it. So I pull up in front of what was in their student union, their student center. And there are these two co-eds walking along the street. And I roll the window down. I say, "Excuse me, ladies, can you tell me where the football stadium is?" And I swear this is true. They look at each other and they look back at me and they say, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have any idea." And if the car had a sunroof on it, I could have seen the stadium lights. We were 2 blocks from the stadium. I mean, it was the darndest thing I ever saw. So finally we parked there. There wasn't any cars there. I mean, you could tailgated 50 feet from the stadium if you wanted to. And we go in, and now this is the University of Houston in the 4th largest metropolitan area in the United States. And there's like 7,000 people, maybe. And there's 300 students. There were 300 students there. Okay. And it was just the darndest thing I ever saw. I mean, like nobody cared about their program. They absolutely did not care one thing about football at the University of Houston. Now that's all changed, but that's where they started 25 years ago, 30 years ago.
Right. And a lot of people, if they had not experienced something like that firsthand or seen it, that would be hard to believe because of Houston's background in the prestigious Southwest Conference.
Oh yeah,
But
and the same is true of Cincinnati. It's almost Cincinnati's parallel. UCF to some degree is the same way. USF is still stuck there in that same mode. I talk a little bit about there's a huge difference between off-campus stadiums and on-campus stadiums in terms of atmosphere, in terms of student support, in terms of university support, any way you want to look at it. That's big time true with like UConn. It's definitely true with USF. It's definitely true with Temple. It doesn't matter how big the market is. If your stadium's 20 miles from your campus, you got a problem.
And what you said about Army is definitely spot on. I had the chance when I was 14 years old back in 1995 to attend that game there. The Pirates won. Morris Foreman, the late Morris Foreman, had a tremendous game that day. We made that trip, my dad and I, with Pat Lane, and that was a road trip for the ages. Had the chance to see that unbelievable atmosphere there at Michie Stadium, and why it was ranked only behind Yankee Stadium and Augusta National by Sports Illustrated as far as sporting venues to watch an event. And I can see why, because there in early November with the leaves changing, that drive in to West Point along the Hudson River, it was breathtaking, and obviously the game atmosphere itself, because
Bubba, you ask about the motivation for the book, of course, and people would say, "What's the best trip you've ever taken?" Well, the best road trip ever I've done several times, and that was we would fly to New York City on Thursday, and Thursday night catch a show, dinner, whatever else. Friday we usually around Christmas time, pre-Christmas, we would do some shopping on Friday, catching a show or dinner and stuff. And on Saturday morning early, the bus would come to the hotel and put us all on a bus, and they'd take us down to the dock down there at like 48th Street, something like that. And you'd have 150 pirates on a big 100+ foot yacht, and we would sail up the Hudson River with our pirate flag flying. And it's 35 miles, and it takes several hours to get up the river. It was gorgeous, the Hudson River with the leaves changing in the fall and everything. And then they put you on the little school bus and take you up to the stadium. It's up the top of the hill, and then put you, and of course it'd be breakfast and pirate beverages and everything going up, and then dinner and more pirate beverages coming back down. And you come into the harbor and sail by the Statue of Liberty, and they take you back to the dock that night. And it was just a glorious trip. I mean, forget the football game. It was just a great trip.
Definitely was. Had the chance when I was passing through New York City to see the Plaza Hotel at night. And obviously that was something, being a 14-year-old at the time, that I could relate to because of Home Alone. I guess it'd been out about 4 years at that time. And, Donald Trump walking through the Plaza Hotel. And then we had an excellent dinner at Carmine's. So, and Pat Lane had lived in New York City in that general area. And so he knew a lot of what we would want to see and what would be good to just passing through on a Friday night like that.
Yeah. New York's a special place, but you had that Army experience, an Army game experience, and that's really something.
Final thing I have for you, Carl, is having been around the program in some capacity, be it as a student, as a fan, serving on various committees, as I've referenced, and having the chance to interact with so many Pirate fans, administrators, coaches. Give us your perspective on this, current age of college athletics, both in terms of NIL and then also just funding of scholarships through the Pirate Club. That's something in recent years with some of the hardships off the field as well as on the field. We saw our Pirate Club numbers dip from 83 or 8,400 down into about the 43 or 4,400 range. But now, fortunately, they're back up to at least around 6,000 or so. So what are some of your thoughts there? What would you leave Pirate Nation with on both of those fronts?
Yeah, the transfer portal I think is a real problem because when a young man signs a letter of intent to accept a scholarship, it's a contract. I mean, it's a contract. It's just like you're buying a house. It's just like you're taking out a loan or whatever. It's a contract. And I think you're teaching people the wrong thing, that, you can walk away from a contract anytime you want to. I've never thought that was true, but we're teaching them the wrong thing. We're teaching them that their commitment and their word is not good. It's only good for a year, and that's it. So that's my take on transfer. On NIL, I think that the full cost of attendance, when you add in the other piece to it, in other words, the fact that, a kid lives in Arizona and goes to school at East Carolina, and then a kid lives in Winterville and goes to East Carolina, and the kid from Arizona wants to go home and see his parents over Christmas or whenever. Obviously it's a disadvantage, and maybe we ought to be paying for that. In other words, they ought to have a level playing field. Okay. And And I realized that we're giving scholarships to all these kids, and some of them. And I also, if you look at in my book, there's a thing about best scholarship given, and you're going to see why we gave this kid to play football a scholarship and what he did with it. It'll blow your mind. But we're giving them a scholarship, and we're paying room and board, and we're doing this, that, and the other. I mean, we're paying a lot. We should be doing more, but I think the NIL thing has kind of gotten out of control, and I think somebody's gonna find a way to rein it in. The problem I have with NIL is the inequality of it. In other words, the skill players, the quarterback, maybe the wide receivers and running back are all getting a lot of money, but the guys who are blocking on the blind side and the guys who are playing in the trenches, they're not doing so well. And I think that's going to create, over a period of time, that's going to create resentment among the players, because why is he getting so much and I'm just covering his butt, and so I think that's a bad way to do it. I think there needs to be some more equality way of doing it. Does that not make any sense?
That definitely makes sense. And for comparison of something, an example that we've heard here in the last few weeks, in direct connection with East Carolina within the American Athletic Conference, SMU is paying, or so we hear, each of its 85 scholarship players $35,000 annually, and then each of its 13 men's basketball players $35,000 annually. So that comes out to $3.53 million or something, somewhere along those lines. And it's something that I know Coach Houston has been pretty vocal that with Team Boneyard, you can go to teamboneyard.org if you'd like to make a contribution there. Get that plug in, but that's something.
Have you ever been to SMU?
I have not, but I know other Pirate fans who have, and I know they have some deep pockets.
It is strategically located in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America, and I talk about that in the book, by the way.
On the hilltop, right? That's what you always hear, on the hilltop.
It's across from the entrance to it's an incorporated town that's actually part of Dallas. It's called Highland Park, and there's some people there that you may have heard of that live in that neighborhood, like Jerry Jones, George Bush, etc., are all residents in Highland Park. Driving through Highland Park is like a jaw-dropping experience anyway, and then the university is right slam across the street from that. So the other thing about the NIL, if you're going to go play football at Duke, you're getting probably a $75,000 a year education over there. So how does that equate to if you come to East Carolina and it's whatever our average cost of attendance plus plus scholarship is concerned? There's a huge inequality there. I mean, Steve Logan always used to talk about trying to what a disadvantage Duke had in recruiting certain kinds of players. And I mean, they're getting a $65,000, $75,000 a year education out of it too. So, I mean, to me, I just think it's we just need to find a way to level the darn playing field.
Yeah. As you know, it's about the here and the now, and and there's no doubt that something need to be done as far as players a little bit above and beyond the scholarship. But I'm like you, I'm definitely a believer that a lot of these young men need to see the value of the scholarship and the education that they're getting at their institution, and what that can do for them in the future.
What 1 point whatever percent go to play in the NFL, okay, and So what's the other
point whatever
yeah,
a fraction of 1%.
Yeah, I mean, so what are the other guys going to do when they turn 24 years old, 23 years old? I mean, it's really short-sighted, and it's short-sighted of those kids. They're not getting good advice, and it's short-sighted of the people who claim to be looking out, the people in higher education who claim to be looking out for them.
Undoubtedly. Well, Carl, we really appreciate you being so generous with your time today, spending a little over an hour with us. And, for folks, again, you can get the book, My View from 20 Rows Up, One Pirate Fan's Story of ECU Football. It's available on Amazon. You just search ECU Football or ECU Football Book, and you can locate it there. Also, if you're in the Greenville area or when you are in Greenville, attending an East Carolina game or what have you, you can go to Stadium Sports right there near the railroad bridge on Charles, and then you can also go to the UBE. And will it be available at pirateware.com as well?
I don't know the answer to that. You could probably call them or send them an email and ask them. I don't know that we didn't talk about that, so I don't know. I don't know the answer. I know he has books in stock right now. I do know that. So maybe he can put one in the mail to you if you want to buy one that way.
Pirate fans, and that is loyal East Carolina supporter and author Carl Davis, and we appreciate everyone tuning in to A Pirate's Life from me on the Sports Objective. We'll be visiting with you soon on some of our other programming here on the Sports Objective and Pirates with a big game. If you're listening to this, early in the week, the Pirates will be taking on UCF, and they'll be visiting Minji's Coliseum on Wednesday night. We'll also have programming as Absolute Empowerment with Coach Jeff Connors. We'll continue here in 2023, as well as all of our other Sports Objective programming. Follow us on social media, on Twitter at TheSportsOBJ, on Instagram and TikTok at The Sports Objective. Like and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For Carl Davis, I'm Bubba Rosenbaum. We appreciate you tuning in as always. And as always, go Pirates.
You're watching The Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates.
Yeah, my heart is purple and gold. I'm a pirate down of my soul, and I don't back down, not at all. Find out when the cannons explode, from the sidelines down to the post. Put it down like not even close, all out to the last whistle blow. From the flag with the soul and crossbones. Everybody stand up, get your hands up, let a team know that we got their back. This is our house, this is our town, our time, everyone.